Many of you have been asking in the comments what happened to Councillor Rosie Dawson. Yes, the one who made Karina laugh so much.
I'm not being sat in this chair for my own glory. I'm not sat here to advance anything in my own life. I could have taken up crocheting. I'm not here to absorb abuse, and I'm not going to be standing for it or sitting for it.
So did she take up crocheting during the summer months, or was she in a state of utter remorse for how she handled the public in the last full council meeting?
My announcements, just to let you know what I've been doing over, it seems like a long time ago, it's been the whole summer. I was involved in the Independence Day for Ukraine in Dawlish and in Newton Abbot, really important time, and Teambridge Council has done a huge amount actually, and it's been a sterling effort to support people from Ukraine. And I think traditionally those civic services are seen as sort of parades of people in chains and things. I think it's much more than that. It's great to meet people and have time, meet people in other councils. It's really great to be able to talk to other chairs at length in person. I did judge a charity show for a charity dog show for Macmillan Cancer Care. That's actually probably the most stressful thing you do as a chair outside of being here, because everybody thinks their dogs are amazing. But again, a great cause and a lovely show in the community. I'm also planning my civic event for March, which will be something different for International Day of Happiness. So if any councillors across the chamber would like to get involved with that, I could do with the help. If you'd like to give me a shout.
And I'm sure it will indeed be a very happy day. Now, how about the rest of the council? Have they taken all the complaints about Councillor Dawson seriously? Or have they just doubled down, defending the indefensible?
I and my fellow councillors will not tolerate abuse and intimidation against the chair of the council. We will not tolerate any abuse to any councillor, officer or member of the public. To that end, while investigations carry on, if this is repeated from any councillor, the Liberal Democrats, joined by the Conservatives and the Independents, agreed by their leaders, will take a robust stand. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. That is a very positive step forward. But I also would like to remind you and the Conservatives, who appear to have a very short memory, that although you have taken this stance now, we have had many examples over the years of bullying, intimidation and misogyny in this chamber.
Now, after the absolute shit show of the last full council meeting, it was obvious they were going to do their absolute best to shut down similar lines of inquiry. So, how exactly were they going to do it? Well, let's find out, shall we?
Morning. So you've submitted your question, you've had a response from the leader of the council. Do you have a supplementary question?
I do. I appreciate what you've just said, Councillor Keeling. However, actions really speak louder than words. One of the main Nolan principles is honesty, and it feels very much like the Lib Dems are being very dishonest about this debate that has been going on. So I would like to know how many Lib Dems in this chamber would be willing to stand up now and be truthful and say that trans women are men. Anyone?
So when you have a supplementary question,
That is a question. How many?
Can I explain? When you have a supplementary question, the rules state that is a supplementary question that is to the person that answered your original question. So I'll go to the leader for a response. He may wish to give a verbal response. He may wish to give a written response.
Okay. You can find out how many would be willing to do that.
Leader?
Thank you. And I thank you for your supplementary question. I will reply in writing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
All right. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. So firstly, on the first one, members of the public are allowed 3 minutes to ask a question, not to make political speeches or otherwise. Firstly, I'd say it's very difficult to ask a question when you're not allowed to provide context. And also, why do you believe that women's rights are a political issue and that my concern was a political speech or otherwise? So I'd like an answer to that. And then my second question Do you think it's acceptable that I've now been waiting 14 weeks for a formal reply, that my question today was handed to me on arrival, my answers to my question? And also, do you think that part of that formal reply should include an apology for interrupting and cutting off my speech when I was entitled to 3 minutes?
Thank you. So as it says in the rules, you are right, it's up to 3 minutes, but it is to ask a supplementary question, and it's not to include inappropriate or inflammatory language. I'll come to you, Leader, if you want to come back on those points of the supplementary question.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for the question, which is supplementary. And again, I will reply in writing to you in detail. Thank you.
Can I just say that you've actually changed what you said, because you put down inflammatory language, which I don't think is actually in my reply. Why have you added in inflammatory language?
You'll get a response from the Leader.
But I also need a response from you, Rose, because you actually put in inflammatory language and inserted that.
Okay, so we're going now to Gillian Blick. If you'd like to come up and take the table, please. You've had a response from the Executive Member for Climate Change, Environment, Flood and Coastal Risk Management.
Action on Climate Change in Teignbridge is a group of unelected non-employees embedded in your council website. What processes do you have to monitor and supervise their activities, and how do you propose to assess whether carbon neutral is being achieved?
Thank you, and I'll come to the said Executive Member, Councillor Jackie Hook.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, Action on Climate in Teignbridge, as stated in my answer, are a not-for-profit community interest company. We work closely with them. As it says, it would only be natural to do so. They are full of experts willing to give their knowledge for free. They're not contracted to us in any way. They provide useful advice to us, which we listen to amongst a raft of other people that we listen to on the topic of climate change. In terms of monitoring our carbon footprint progress, you can go on our website and you can see how we're progressing year on year. The detailed figures are there. I assume you mean this council's actions. So yes, they're detailed on our website, so you can go and look at them there.
And question 4, we have Simon Baxter. Would you like to take the table?
Good morning.
Morning. So you have submitted your question and you had a response from the Executive Member for Green Spaces and Leisure, who is not here today. So the Leader will be taking that. Okay, so do you have a supplementary question?
Like the other questioners or members of the public, today I have only just received what passes for an answer to my question, which is basically, yeah, we'll look at it. I would like to read, if that's possible, my question so that it's on record for the public.
It is on record because it's part of the...
on film...
you now get your opportunity to ask a supplementary question. So do you have a supplementary question? Because the Leader's quite happy to take your question.
Is it possible for me to read out my original question so that the council... It's not possible. Why is that?
So do you have a supplementary question?
Why is it not possible for me to read my question? I'm a human being. I'm asking a question of human beings. It's normal to speak that.
Your question has been asked. Your question has been answered. You now have the opportunity to ask a supplementary question, and that's part of our constitution.
I would comment that that's not a very satisfactory...
Point of order, Chair. Excuse me, Mr Baxter, if you don't mind. Point of order, Chair. I do believe that within the Constitution, the right to have the questions read out, as well as the answers by the Chair, is an option that Mr Baxter can request legitimately. So from my perspective, I think Mr Baxter perhaps maybe needs to ask you to read out the question and the response that there was forthcoming. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Could you perhaps read out my question for me, Chair?
Given the length of your question and the content being very similar to what escalated the meeting on the last occasion, I'd like you to ask your supplementary question. but I'm not willing to read your question out. It will form, it's not going to be hidden, it does form part of our public record. You have had an answer and you will get another answer now if you ask a supplementary question.
I would comment that my question is, while the theme of it is about facilities for transgender people, I would point out that it is very different in wording and intent, in fact, from questions which have been asked before, and I resent your implication that the question is in any way might be inflammatory or even controversial, because the intent of the question is to shed light on a difficult issue which really needs public discourse.
I think if we look at your answer that you received, Mr. Baxter, was, as can be seen from the agenda for today, a notice of motion relating to the subject matter of this question is to be put to the Council later this morning. Consequently, the issues raised will be formally considered by a committee of this Council. Thereafter, any recommendations arising from that work will be formally considered by this authority and any appropriate action taken as necessary. So I am going to ask you again, we're probably approaching your 3 minutes, but I would like a supplementary question from you if you have one. I don't want you to leave without having had that chance to ask it.
Thank you. Will the Council please bear in mind, or the committee who looks at this, will they please bear in mind that while transgender people are, of course, a protected characteristic under the Equality Act, historically, in human life, for thousands, probably millions of years, the most vulnerable, obviously vulnerable part of human society is the females and the children. And it is absurd that any twisting of facts would lead to people equipped as men to be in the protected space of women and children. Please, will you remember that it is women and children who are traditionally and in fact vulnerable.
Thank you. Leader, you took that question. I apologise that the executive member isn't there, but you will have a response now if you want to wait for a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Baxter, for your supplementary. If I can say that we respect all protected characteristics as defined in law and expect our councillors to do the same. Thank you.
Councillor Jane Taylor, please. Thank you. I've got 5 minutes, haven't I? So
You do, yeah, 5 minutes, yeah.
My motion is, it's in front of you there, so you can read it, but it's my view, and that of many others, as can be seen by the reaction of the public to what occurred at the last meeting of this council, is that sex matters. It is my further view that this council cannot continue to ignore and sideline the centrality of sex as a key factor of discrimination and deny women single-sex spaces where they are necessary, proportionate and legitimate to the objects of upholding their safety and dignity. I ask that you consider why we have toilets and changing rooms for women and girls only, and why the authority places a sign outside those facilities when a male cleaner is in a female-only toilet or changing room. When you've answered these questions, you will have identified the legitimate reason for taking the proportionate action of not allowing biological males into women-only spaces. This equally applies to men's facilities, but in my opinion, a legitimate aim is more likely to be around dignity and privacy rather than safety. However, the religious practices of some men may prevent them using a facility which could be accessed by a biological woman. To lawfully establish a single-sex provision, you must meet at least one of a number of statutory conditions and show that limiting any service or provision on the basis of sex is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. So you need a legitimate aim, and to achieve it, you must act proportionately. According to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, A legitimate aim for a single-sex toilet and changing room include reasons of privacy, decency, to prevent trauma, safety and to support religious practices, but could include many others. It supports that as long as it's proportionate means of meeting the legitimate aim, then trans people can be excluded, including those with a gender recognition certificate. Therefore, it stands to reason that if the presence of a member of the opposite sex is the cause, then the exclusion of that person to meet the legitimate aim is reasonable and proportionate. They go on to say that even if you cannot prove that such an act is proportionate to achieving a legitimate aim, then it might be unlawful. It doesn't say that it is. I will go on to the recommendations. I appreciate that this motion has caused some consternation among some officers of this council, but it does not need to. We can lawfully provide single-sex provision. Many councillors have supported this motion to come here today, and that is because for many of those councillors who have contacted me, they view it to be quite straightforward. They know what the definition of a man and a woman is, and they understand what a single-sex space is. For many, it is not complex. What is difficult for the majority to understand is that a female-only single-sex space is accessible to any man by invitation of this council. That to make one man feel uncomfortable, every woman and girl in Teignbridge will, at the very least, feel very uncomfortable, and depending on their lived experience, some will be terrified. The same applies to men. How comfortable would you feel if a woman walks into a toilet and watches you at the urinal? But it would be okay to Teignbridge because she would feel more comfortable in the gents. Only this week, Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, met with the Darlington nurses, whose NHS Trust policies permits any member of staff who identifies as the opposite sex to access single-sex changing rooms, toilets and showers, the same policy we have in this council. This not only applies to members of the public, but also to our staff. Does this council also expect women to come to work and change in front of biological men? When those nurses complained, they were told that they were transphobic, that they needed to be re-educated, broaden their mindset and be more inclusive. In fact, very similar language was directed at me by officers who I had asked to support me in drafting this motion. Mr Streeting went on to say that he believes sex is biological and he would be calling for the government to do whatever is necessary to ensure that women have access to single-sex spaces, changing rooms and toilets. I have recently been made aware that there is a review of the council's policy for Broadmeadow. I was told they needed to beef it up and were speaking to their leisure centre staff. In view of the sensitive nature of the policy, you would think that the solicitor, Mr Woodhead, would have been consulted or at least notified, considering the number of complaints on this issue, but he knew nothing about it. When I met with officers only a few weeks ago, there was no talk of beefing it up or of a review of the policy. It was made very clear to me that this council would allow men to use toilets and changing rooms which had been specifically set aside for single-sex spaces, and for me to have a contrary view was transphobic. The facilities at Broadmeadow cater for everyone. There is a mixed-use, inclusive facility and there is a same-sex facility. There is no discrimination of those people who do not wish to identify as their biological sex. There is a facility for them. The other assets owned by TDC may not be as straightforward, but that will be included in any review. So, my recommendations are that we agree a definition of single-sex spaces for males and females, owned or managed by Teignbridge District Council, and any appropriate service provision. 2, we consider whether the council's policies discriminate against anyone on the grounds of a protected characteristic and less lawful and proportionate, and that includes those with a protected characteristic of gender reassignment, and make any other recommendations as it considers appropriate. I suggest that a working group is set up and we include in that officers, councillors and outside bodies who have an interest in this subject, and that all recommendations be brought back to this council. This should not be a decision that is made by officers without any specialist legal advice. Thank you. Thanks very much.